Another big storm going on in D.C. right now, and top Republican Senator Rand Paul is now accusing the Obama administration of trying to scare Americans into thinking that the U.S. will default on its debts. Lawmakers must vote to raise the nation's borrowing limit by next week, by the 17th. So here he is, Senator Rand Paul, on Meet the Press this weekend.
It's irresponsible of the president and his men to even talk about default. There's no reason for us to default. We bring in $250 billion in taxes every month. Our interest payment is $20 billion. Tell me why we would ever default. We have legislation called the Full Faith and Credit Act, and it tells the president you must pay the interest on the debt. So this is a game.
Interesting, right? Joined now by Kirsten Powers, Daily Beast columnist, and Tony Sayegh, the president of Talk Radio News Service. Both are wonderful Fox News contributors. Good morning, you guys. Great to have you here.
Thanks,
so, Kirsten, what's the big deal?
Well, I'm going to read something from Ronald Reagan, who, when he was debating with the Republicans at the time who did not want to raise the debt limit, he said, "The full consequences of a default by the United States, or even the serious prospect of default by the United States, are impossible to predict and awesome to contemplate." So that was Ronald Reagan in arguing for why you needed to raise the debt ceiling, and which he really had to rely mostly on Democrats for at the time. So I honestly don't know what Rand Paul is talking about, and it's hard to keep track of what's going on, because yesterday John Boehner said that we were basically headed for a default if we don't reach a deal on the government shutdown. So you have John Boehner saying we're headed for default. You have Rand Paul claiming that Obama's fear-mongering by saying we're headed for default.
Well, you know, after Reagan said that, they came to an agreement, including the Gramm-Rudman legislation, as part of a negotiation between both sides, and that is what a lot of people feel the president is unwilling to do here, Tony. We've seen a long history of negotiating over these debt ceiling issues so that each side kind of gets some of what they want to straighten out the long-term economic picture they feel.
Exactly right, Martha. And listen, you mentioned President Reagan, Gramm-Rudman Hollings being a huge deficit reduction package that was sweeping part of the whole debt ceiling extension. In 1990, George H.W. Bush made similar reforms to the budget process as part of a debt ceiling extension. Democrats obstructed President George W. Bush's debt ceiling request in the early 2000s because they wanted to prevent him from being able to pass what were then known and now known as the Bush tax cuts. So this is always part of the process, because you're dealing with what America spends, how much money America spends, and what they spend it on. So this is a very natural time to have both parties negotiate, and that's why the president's position to not negotiate is indefensible. But to go to what Senator Paul was saying, there is one thing we know is true, and there's one thing both sides agree on. Default would be devastating. So let's take it off the table. The president gets enough revenue into the federal treasury to pay our interest payment. That is the only way we default, is by not paying that, which is why you had Republicans, after the 2011 debt ceiling showdown, pass the Full Faith and Credit Act in the House that mandates the president pay that payment and allows the executive branch to prioritize other payments. So Democrats refused to take it up in the Senate, and then the president even threatened to veto if it even passed Congress. So that's
the situation that you have, Kirsten, where we have to pay these bills because of the Full Faith and Credit Act, but it does leave the Treasury some discretion on that, and it allows them to say, you know what, then we're not going to spend this and we're not going to spend that, so that we can meet those obligations. This does feel like a perfect opportunity to have a discussion about spending. Do you think the president will ultimately be willing to do that?
Well, if that's true, then why did Ronald Reagan say that there was a prospect of default if they didn't raise the debt ceiling? You know, it's not. I don't. Or was Ronald Reagan lying?
That's not what we're saying. But what we're saying is that because
Ronald Reagan negotiated, Kirsten.
That's what we're talking about.
It doesn't matter. He was saying if you don't raise the debt ceiling, there is a prospect of default. That is a fact. So I don't understand what you think is where all the money. What's your solution? I guess is the question. So
I guess the solution is negotiation and figuring out a path to negotiate a deal that would cut some spending.
I have a good suggestion. Why don't we agree with the Full Faith and Credit Act and say, let's take default off the table while we do negotiate the more complicated issues that both sides disagree on. We agree that default is destructive and should not be on the table, Kirsten. And the reality is, and you've said it before and I have agreed with you, the debt problems are much more long-term. These are structural problems with our entitlements, with other kinds of spending programs we have. in this country that's driving up our debt and deficit. Those are going to take some time to hammer out, which is why in 2011 you saw the two sides try to do a grand bargain. The president won. He got his way on the fiscal cliff. He got his way with sequestration. This time now the can can't be kicked down any further, and John Boehner has said if we're going to solve this problem, let's do it comprehensively, and let's at least get both people at the table talking. The president's refused to do so.
The idea that both people aren't at the table, as you know, the Democrats have agreed to stay at sequestration levels, which is something that was not popular in the no, but this is not the budget that they want, and this is not popular in the Democratic caucus, and it's something that Nancy Pelosi had to bring them around to agree to, and a lot of Democrats are not happy with. So I wouldn't say that there aren't any concessions going on. In terms of the negotiations, I think the president will end up negotiating over the debt ceiling. I think what he's trying to stop is this brinksmanship of every time the debt debate comes up, it feels like the government's being held hostage.
But if you don't have that discussion, Kirsten, then you're going 17, 18, 19, 20. Where's the end of the $1 trillion of debt? If you don't have that discussion when this question comes up, it's an important time to think about how much you're spending, is it not?
It is, except you have to remember that the president believes that this is a time to be stimulating the economy, not cutting spending. So he has a different philosophy than the Republicans do. And I don't think that the idea that there's some middle ground that the Republicans are trying to reach, there's some negotiation that they've offered. I haven't seen it. What's the negotiation? Even over the government shutdown, the big negotiation is we're going to defund Obamacare.
No, that's not true.
That's not a negotiation.
Tax reform.
That was the original. That is how it started. Now now that they've gotten themselves into this mess, they're coming up with other ideas.
Well, now it's a conversation of delaying and at least getting rid of the subsidies for Congress. But Kirsten, one quick question. How much is the president asking us to extend the debt limit by? He's not even giving us the number. He wants a blank check, and the American people don't want him to have one.
We're going to have to leave it there.
Bloomberg polls at 61% are against the blank check for the president.
Tony and Kirsten, we will see you next Monday. We'll see where we are then when we come back a week from now.